Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are, and welcome to this second TDL webinar of 2025. We're very excited to have a great panel who are going to discuss the transition, the challenges, the threats, and so on towards post-quantum cryptography. I'd like everybody to remain on mute throughout the course of the webinar, except for the panelists, of course. And if you have a question at any time, you want to put a question that Steve, as our moderator, can pick up, please do so through the chat facility, which is open to everyone. So with that, I'd like to introduce our moderator today, Steve Purser, who has a very distinguished history, which I'm not going to go into here, but you can look at his history on the TDL website. Currently, he is a strategic advisor to TDL, Trust in Digital Life. And if you want to know any more about TDL, please get in touch with me. So with that, Steve, I'll hand over to you for the rest of this panel.
Thank you, David, and a very warm welcome from my side. I think it promises to be a very interesting debate. So we have three excellent panelists, all of whom know a lot about the subject. So we have Michiel Marcus, who's cryptography researcher in applied cryptography and quantum algorithms at TNO. We have Nigel Smart, cryptographer and professor at COSIC KU Leuven. And we have John Velissarios, founder and director of Otranto Limited. So promises to be a very interesting discussion. The way we're going to run it is I'm going to make a few introductory comments. I will promise not to be too long, but I think it's important to set the scene, especially as we don't really know what the background is of the people who have joined us today. So you'll forgive me if I start with the basics, but by the time I finish, I think we'll have enough basics to launch into the discussion. So post-quantum computing, very much a topical subject, of course, but let's start with quantum computers and what they are, because I think many people confuse quantum computing with post-quantum cryptography, but they're not at all the same thing. So post-quantum cryptography, I'll use the abbreviation PQC, is actually a response to advances in quantum computing. It does not itself use quantum techniques, but it could do in principle. There's nothing to stop it doing so, but it is not the same thing as quantum computing. So what are quantum computers? Well, they're a new type of computer based on quantum mechanics, which are very good at doing certain well-defined computations. And this is really important. They're not good at everything. They're good at some things, and at those things, they are exceptionally good. Some people say exponentially better than classical computers. Now, unfortunately, the things they are good at include breaking the algorithms that we rely on to secure information at the moment on the internet. So this is the bad news. However, they don't allow you to surf at light speed. They don't allow you to do most of the things you do on a day-to-day basis any better than you do at the moment. So it's important to realize that it's very specific problems that they are good at. And in fact, they are very bad at some things, or at least no better than classical computers. And this is the basis of what we call post-quantum cryptography. So why post-quantum cryptography then? We have cryptography at the moment, right? And it's doing a good job. But quantum computers are a threat. And in reality, they're most of a threat to the so-called public key or asymmetric algorithms due to a mathematical innovation by Peter Shor, known as Shor's algorithm. And the original algorithm was designed to find prime factors of a given integer. And this is, of course, the way that probably the most popular or the most well-known asymmetric algorithm, RSA, works. But Shor also proposed algorithms for solving discrete logarithm problem and other problems based on finding the period of some cyclic series of numbers. If this is all mumbo jumbo to you, don't worry about it. We probably won't talk about it again. But you do need to remember that asymmetrical public key cryptography is the most at risk. Please contradict me later on if you don't agree, by the way, fellow panelists. Studies vary widely on the number of qubits, that's a quantum bit, necessary to try to crack a 2048-bit composite number, which is the base of RSA keys. It varies from tens of thousands to millions, and we're nowhere in that range in terms of today's quantum computers. However, we are pretty confident that eventually this will happen. Symmetric cryptography is also under threat to a certain extent due to an algorithm known as Grover's algorithm. Here, it's a lot more forgiving. So basically, Grover's algorithm allows you to search a set of elements, not in n time, but in square root of n time. So it's a performance increase. But we can easily compensate for this by increasing the key size that we are using with the algorithm. And indeed, symmetric key cryptography is one of the classes of post-quantum cryptography algorithms. Bit of nomenclature. You might hear the phrase cryptographically relevant quantum computer. This is a phrase coined by the NSA to refer to a quantum computer that can be used to break encryption. Now, most recently, at an annual conference run by ETSI, this is 2022, Professor Mosca, more about him in a couple of minutes, shared a presentation indicating that experts think that such a computer will be reality in around 15 years. But yeah, this is an average. There were some pretty wide variations there. Don't really hold your breath. Nobody knows. The big thing at the moment, which is a threat and which people should be taking seriously right now, is a thing called harvest now, decrypt later, which is the idea that people can collect data should you choose to send it in encrypted form over the internet, for instance, store it somewhere, and then when the technology is ripe, they will decrypt it. So this is very worrying for data that needs to be secure for longer periods of time, of course. So what does PQC do? Well, simply put, PQC uses algorithms based on mathematical problems that quantum computers are bad at. So an example would be to find the nearest point in a very large dimensional lattice that's close to a certain vector, for instance. This is a very classical example. And quantum computers are not good at this. So there are actually many classes of quantum computing algorithms. I won't bore you with a complete list. I don't think it'll help today, but you can look them up on the internet. They're very widely distributed. There's a whole new set of standards from NIST, which are now algorithms which are seen to be commercially viable. So you can start using them, and they have the NIST status. So this is very good news. And you don't really need to know anything more than this as implementers. This is the domain of at least two of our guests here, Nigel and Michiel, who are both cryptographers. So they deal with all that kind of thing. We just have to deal with the implementation. So cryptography is solid. And the big question of today is how and when do we make the transition to PQC? Well, there's a thing out there called the Mosca's equality, the same Professor Mosca. And if you use this, look it up, please. If you plug in sensible numbers, the answer will almost invariably be now. So you need to be thinking about this transition. And in fact, you need to be busy with it, to be quite honest, because it's likely to take a long while. Commission has requested member states to prepare a roadmap for transition to PQC. So the ball is rolling. My personal impression is that a lot of organizations are not taking up this challenge, and this is a bit alarming. But there are several challenges, of course. One is that one of the typical and most promoted transition models is a thing called hybrid cryptography, where, very loosely speaking, you use both traditional cryptography and PQC at the same time, so you're doubly protected. This is recommended by BSI, ANSI, and NIST. There's some difficulties with key sizes and other technical factors in implementing PQC in certain protocols like TLS. There are toolkits out there, some very good ones actually, but commercial off-the-shelf products are not that developed. Chrome, Cloudflare, Apple all have offerings, for instance. And lastly here, the number of cryptographically enabled devices that needs to be transitioned is huge. And I think this is the big problem. And in the EU, I think it's fair to say that we are well behind the curve. So what would I recommend from my side? And it will be interesting to see if my co-panelists, well, my panelists agree with this. So first of all, understand the rationale for PQC and develop a basic understanding of the core techniques and state of the art. Perform initial risk analysis on your own environment, of course. That's very important. It's your stuff which counts. Taking into account this store now, decrypt later problem. Carry out an inventory of current cryptographic software, because that's going to define how much work you have to do to get from your current situation to the new one. Develop a first idea of the threat timeline, develop a first idea of planning, and begin the transition. So very briefly, that is how I understand the subject and how I would recommend going forward, but I'm the least knowledgeable person here, so I'm going to now pass over to my panelists, and I'm going to do so in alphabetical order, please. So I'm going to begin with Michiel. You have 4 minutes, please, if you could give your views on the subject.
Thank you very much, Steve. Thanks for having me. So yeah, I work at TNO, the National Institute of Applied Scientific Research in the Netherlands. We've got some firsthand experience here, so I'm happy to share some of those insights. I think you made some very valid points about things people can do now. But I think what I'd like to address is that people often think about the whole transition as a headache that costs money, costs time, costs effort, and will not really get them anything extra except for being protected against quantum computers. And I'm here to kind of argue the contrary. There's already steps people can take in preparing for migration that could benefit their current security posture. We built a migration handbook at TNO where we define what we call no regret moves. And these are actions that organizations can take that are in preparation for migration, but don't necessarily need to be done for the migration yet. So these are things like, well, you already said it yourself, Steve, understanding your dependencies from a cryptographic point of view. Who are the vendors of the cryptographic products you're using? What kind of cryptographic assets am I maintaining here? And also, what kind of data do they handle? Do I have personal data that I'm handling of other people, or is it just some company data that really has an impact on what you need to do and how fast? But just understanding like which assets do I have, which dependencies do I have, will help even if there is another type of vulnerability that is not necessarily related to the quantum computer. Could just be another CVE that pops up from other cryptographic parts being broken that you want to quickly fix. Then these can of course happen all the time. You never know. Then something that can also help is already understanding who in your organization would need to head, let's say, an internal task force for this. Give roles to people such that they can start estimating the cost of migration. Because when you talk to policymakers, could be in the organization, someone will have to get a bunch of money that will help you kickstart the migration. But they will always ask, like, okay, so what are the costs? What are the risks? So you want to do a risk assessment and you want to understand how much money it would cost to migrate, because then they can make the right decision based on those insights. And of course, a conclusion could be we don't think the costs outweigh the benefits here. Well, maybe a quantum computer will be there. We don't care. It's too much money. But then you always want to have a backup plan, because if you're wrong and the quantum cryptographically relevant quantum computer does arise much sooner than you expected, you need to have a fallback scenario here if you cannot immediately migrate. So these are all things to take into account even before you start your migration that can already help in your current security posture. And I think I'll stick to that since my time is a bit up, I think.
No, but thank you for that. So Nigel, what's your take on this?
Okay, so I'm going to say something very controversial, and then I'm going to download. What I'm going to say sort of drive down into it. It's nothing to do with post quantum cryptography, what you should be doing, okay? Because what we know of is if we look at the past, we have had cryptographic Armageddons every 10 years. We've had a cryptographic Armageddon of DES, and we didn't learn the lessons. We had a cryptographic Armageddon of MD5, and we didn't learn the lessons. We had a cryptographic Armageddon of SHA-1, and we didn't learn the lessons. And now this cryptographic Armageddon is purely because people bake in cryptography. They hire some cryptographers, or they hire a company, they get their stuff, they deploy it, and then they forget all about it because it just works. And the whole point of good cryptography works when it just works and everyone forgets about it. And because people forget about it, they don't keep looking at it. So what I would say, the phrase that we should be looking at and focusing on more is not so much PQC, but crypto agility. Because PQC is just a problem. Crypto agility is always there. We have that. Once we solve the PQC problem, we're still going to need crypto agility in the future. So we should actually be talking about crypto agility in order to solve this problem, the previous problems, and all the future problems. So what do I mean by crypto agility? Crypto agility is the fact that you are not wedded to one algorithm. You don't bake into your networks, like some banks did, that the data formats are always 64 bits long, because sometimes you might want to increase the data format. You don't bake into your database that the public key sizes are always 2048 bits, because sometimes they're not. What you have to do is have agility in how you use crypto. And
deploy crypto with the understanding that not only, people deploy crypto, they talk about the key life cycle. Well, there's also an algorithm life cycle. You have to provision the algorithm, use it, and then at some point it's going to reach the end of its life and it's going to have to be retired. Now, currently, the way most organizations which are heavily into crypto work is that they assume the point at which the algorithm retires is after the point in which the person who designed the system actually retires as a human being and therefore doesn't care. Now, that's not a good way for an organization to behave. An organization should actually think it's going to live longer than its staff. So what we should do is actually, so crypto agility is what I would focus on. So that's kind of scary in that you have to do this all the time. But actually for 99% of commercial organizations, there's nothing to do. Because if you think about 99% of all organizations, they use cloud services. Those cloud services are being provisioned by the big cloud service providers, the AWSs of this world, the Microsofts of this world, the Googles of this world, and so on. And they're provisioned via your browser. So the only crypto that 99% of most organizations use is actually in the browser. So all you have to do is make sure, update your browser. Use the latest settings. And already now, we've already had experience of Cloudflare, Google, AWS, and Microsoft running experiments using PQC. And in fact, you can, if you are a big AWS user, have all of your interactions with AWS already PQC now, today. You just flip a switch on the configuration board, and this will happen. You can modify your browser settings so that you will default to PQC settings if the web server that you're connecting to supports PQC. So these are things you can do now, and probably some of the configurations to do that are already been deployed because we've already had tests of PQC on browsers in the real world where people didn't even know this was happening. Okay, so we already have this, and that will cope with the 99% of organizations which really have no cryptography. This person running a website that sells some stuff. But if you're a heavy user of cryptography, then the first thing you need to do is understand, do this cryptographic bill of lading, actually understand what cryptography you're using, and then work out, and just as you would in an organization which is a heavy user of cryptography, look at key life cycles, you should look at algorithm life cycles. And if you do that, you're not only protected against PQC, but you're protected against every other balls up that cryptography can throw at you in the next 20 or 30 years. And you don't have to rely on, keeping people employed who beyond their retirement date.
Okay, so I like the crypto agility idea a lot. Thanks for that. John, you're in a slightly different position, of course, because you're using crypto as part of your daily business quite heavily, I think. So why don't you tell us what you think about this?
Yeah, thank you. And a lot of great points were raised already. And I think I'm going to pile on a little bit more about the crypto agility part of it, because I think, Nigel, you raised excellent points, and I completely agree. I think this is, especially when it comes to quantum cryptography and how do you respond to any particular incidents that may occur in the future, the ability to be not only algorithm agile, key agile, basically agile across the board. You need to have this in order to be able to address any type of things, whether it's quantum or any type of cryptographic key change that's coming your way. And I've seen this over the years. Worked with also hardware vendors and software vendors to be able to adapt, to be able to change sort of the algorithms as well as the key sizes and stuff like that in order to address this as a fundamental. I'm going to step into a couple of other points as well. I think Steve, you raised it, and Michiel, I think you covered it as well. So, and Nigel as well. So inventory, I think, is absolutely key. So in an organization, you need to understand your estate. What are you dealing with? Where's the data? What are you protecting? How are you protecting it? And so on. And I've been on projects in the past where that was step number one. It had to be just to get a complete understanding of the estate, including hardware devices and any type of software, how you manage keys, what are the algorithms, and so on. It's a little bit of it's a detailed exercise, but once you have that view, you have a very good perspective of how big the problem is and where the problem may be actually in terms of the future. So it may not all be in the cloud. It may be in servers. It may be in applications and so on. So I think that's also an important point. The importance of proper cryptographic key lifecycle management, the end-to-end story. How do you manage keys? It's not just about which algorithm you're using, but are you even changing the keys? I've been in situations where keys were installed from the very beginning of an installation and they hadn't been touched in 14 years. And it took me to sort of highlight it to the head of security that then it was a very uncomfortable situation. It's like, well, it's great you have all the cryptography, all this key management, but you haven't even changed the keys in 15 years since you installed this application. The role of vendors, whether it's hardware devices or software security platforms, and their role, I think, is absolutely key. I know a lot of vendors are also looking at how to address the crypto agility topic, but they need to know what to put into it. And in other words, how to make what is the agile to what? What do you need to update? What which algorithms to what algorithms? Which ones are the proper ones to be rolling it over? But I think I've seen also designs in the past that had agility baked in. So where you actually, in the event of a compromise, you can quickly roll over into a new algorithm and a new key size and something completely different. So you're not susceptible to the original attack vector that came into the first place. The other one another couple of points that I'd like to highlight is the ability to detect any type of cryptographic breach. How do you know something's happened? You may not even know this, right? So and you may assume that there's some sort of fraudulent event or some sort of data breach, but can you point back to a cryptographic breach? And that is something that most organizations just don't have a handle on. I think it's really difficult to detect this. You assume the cryptography is secure end to end. You don't question it. You forget about it, as Nigel mentioned. But at the end of the day, it may come down to a cryptographic breach. I've been on the investigation side of cryptographic breaches in the past, and most situations, people didn't even know that it had occurred. And how would you detect it? What are some of the key leading indicators that would give you some indication that something has happened? And it could potentially be a cryptographic breach, let alone quantum, right at the end of the day. And I think just a couple of last point is always assume your cryptographic system can and at some point will be broken. How would you know, and how do you recover quickly? And that the agility side of it is absolutely key.
Thank you, John. Well, listen, 3 excellent points of view, I think, and sets the scene for a really good debate. But I'm going to start by challenging Nigel a bit. I really liked what you said. I think crypto agility I can fully understand that's the way to go. But I would challenge that we have nothing to do. I mean, it seems to me that we have this threat that's already there, harvest now, decrypt later. And I think a lot of organizations either don't even know about it or aren't doing much about it. And of course,
no, you misheard what I said. I said 99% of all organizations don't have to do anything, because 99% of organizations, not the ones you or me talk to, but if you actually go out there into the real world and talk to real people and real organizations, they don't actually use much crypto. They use crypto interacting via a web service. And that web service is apart from the back end. Now, the people running the back end, they sure have to do it, but that ain't you.
Okay. All right.
The point is that 99% of organizations can probably go, we're fine.
Okay. Well, if you're in the 90%, 99%, don't leave us, right?
We'd lose all the attendees on probability of that, right?
No, I understand much better. Okay.
So it's the 1% which matter. And it's interesting. So we've really got to think of this as broadly. It's nothing to do with PQC. It's also to do with weak algorithms. We already know that when vendors who supply cryptography, there are good ones who provide stuff that's well certified, has gone through NIST, there's all the standard algorithms. And those ones you go, okay, so someone's deployed an ECDSA signing thing for some authentication. And that's going to be, now you might go, okay, so let's kind of drill down. So we're going to think about something that's an authentication application. And someone can they could deploy some symmetric key style authentication thing, in which case it's post quantum secure. We don't have to worry about that. They could deploy some signature-based authentication mechanism, some sort of card that signs some challenge and sends it back. And that would not be post-quantum secure. But then the question is, does it matter now to solve that problem? Because for the authentication, it might be that it's just to authenticate me to get into a building, to do something that's very transitory. So the fact that a quantum computer is built for an authentication application 15 years in the future, who cares, right?
I think this is a key point. Yeah.
So that's the thing. So for authentication, but We also know that there are a very large number of authentication applications which are using, quite frankly, crap cryptography.
Also true.
You know, so for example, getting into my car using the key fob or the crypto that's in the key fob, even very, very high-end, and particularly high-end cars, have very, very bad security and crypto.
But Nigel, I'm going to stop you here because we're going a little bit off track.
No. But my point is,
okay,
that comes back to also crypto agility, is that
yes,
those vendors, so you have to understand what your applications are using, and that is to do with, so it's the same problem, but you know, in the sense that understanding what crypto you're using, making sure your vendors are doing something serious,
yes,
being able to replace bad stuff. And we see that all the time. And it's not just a PQC issue. It's an issue that's everywhere.
But let's Michiel come in, because I think he wants to join the debate. Probably has maybe has a different point of view. I don't know. Michiel, tell us.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, I would like to challenge Nigel a little bit as well, because you mentioned that 99% of companies don't have to do much because most of it is in the cloud. But I think a lot of companies also have some type of legacy systems where there's some middleware in the company that it still has cryptography that, you know, might be or is probably vulnerable, that will need to be switched out. And for those, you do really actively need to contact the vendors and understand what their timeline is for migrating. So I think a lot of it is going into the cloud, but one, not all companies want to migrate everything to the cloud. Could be because of confidentiality, could be because of legislature, could be many reasons. And in other cases, they might just not be far enough with their migrations. Everything is on the cloud and still a lot of legacy systems are around.
Yeah, let's do the following now, because I think so I think the point is well made, Nigel, and I think it adds a lot to debate. But let's now concentrate on this X% that is not satisfied by, you know, going with the cloud, and see what they want to do. And my next question is really for these people, you know, who definitely do need to do something to cope with well, the harvest now, decrypt later, and the need to transition in the long term. How should they go about it? Maybe I start with you again. Well, please take whoever wants to take it.
I'll start. Maybe I could start the discussion. I think here, it was mentioned, you know, in the last 30 minutes and so on a couple of times, but I think it's important to emphasize the time value of the data that is being protected. At the end of the day, the harvest now, decrypt later, you know, it really is important for specific types of information. If it's transient, ephemeral stuff that just basically doesn't matter after a couple of minutes or an hour or whatever, or even instantaneous, then protecting that is a second priority. I think the initial priority is highly sensitive information that over long periods of time could lead to a significant exposure. I think that's the important stuff that I think is is key to protect. And I think understanding that as part of the inventory process as well, because I think also that's part of the data information of what systems this is protecting. If this is health records, if this is long-term national secrets and things like that, or is it this transactional data that after a couple of minutes doesn't really matter because you can't undo this transaction anyway. So I think that's the first part of that, to answer that question, I think, and it should be part of that whole process of the analysis that should be done up front.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And I think when I give my own recommendations, those were the first two. So definitely understanding the structure of your data and inventorying your cryptographic infrastructure. But okay, let's say we begin there. How long is this going to take, do you think? And how much of an onus is it going to be on companies to do this, in your experience? Question for everybody.
I mean, I've done it. I've done it before for clients.
Also, I think I think we should not just look at data encryption, because long-term authentication is also important. If I'm signing a contract that has to be valid in 20 years' time, and the quantum computer comes along in 15 years, after 16 years, I could claim that I didn't sign it because the quantum computer had done it for me without my access. Yeah. So you can. So it's not just harvest now, decrypt later. It's also sign now and rely on it later. Is an issue which for some applications is, you know, if you have long-term contracts or financial information, that can be rather big. So for example, blockchain is completely going to have a problem because you won't know who owns which Bitcoin.
Yeah, and I think there you open a sort of can of worms in a sense, quite rightly so, because all the cryptographic network security services are affected. So non-repudiation,
Yeah.
you know, the whole set. So that's actually a very good point. But let's not confuse the poor people in the organization too much. Let's concentrate on the data stuff. So I'm guessing this will be quite a big sort of operation for companies that need to do it. Any ideas of timescales? And should these things overlap, or are they sequential?
I mean, I've done this exercise in the past for certain large organizations, and it's non-trivial task. It takes a certain amount of time. You need a degree of expertise, and you need to have access, and I need to have management support from the very top, because at the end of the day, you're not accessing the data, but you're accessing the systems that would access the data. So you need to have access to the information about this stuff. So I think it needs to be an executive support at the very top to be able to carry out this exercise. This is not something a low level sort of. It's not something. It's not an administrative task. It's sort of, it requires an executive sponsorship. It requires a degree of specialization, expertise, and time to execute. And I think also, if you look at if you have data centers and so on, obviously if things are in the cloud, that makes the task different. But if you have data centers in different geographies, you're adding a level of complexity and time to that. And don't underestimate that many of the even traditional, organizations would have a very varied estate. Some legacy platforms, mid-range systems, and stuff like that are still
Exactly, and
executing,
legacy systems, as
and
Michiel
legacy
said.
systems that work and no one wants to touch, and they don't they don't want to touch those things because they simply work, and those are complicated because, of course, they add a degree of another layer of complexity to manage that. So
Yeah.
timing wise, it's a multi-month exercise. It's not a couple of day exercise. It's a multi-month exercise. With the right level of expertise, I think it's doable, and you get a much better perspective of what is in the estate.
Look,
I
I would
think
say,
if you
going
do
back
that
to Nigel's
exercise
comment
together,
on crypto, sorry, very, very quickly on crypto analysis, and come back to your comment, Nigel, which I still think is a very key point. It seems to me it's a bit like painting the fourth bridge, that it's a continual process which needs to be kicked off quite soon. And again, coming back to this crypto agility idea, this is not just PQC, as you say. So you've got to almost continually review your stuff and keep it up to date. Yeah. But sorry, Nigel, I
I was going to
interrupted.
say, the thing is, you do that analysis,
Yeah.
and then following on from you say, is you then have to do a threat analysis of actually, if we've got this legacy system, is it worth the effort of touching the legacy system, given the issues or the cryptographic weaknesses that were found in that system? Is it worth carrying on with the legacy system? In some sense, you can think of banking has done this for the last 20 years. We've still got triple des. We're always going to have triple des. It's kind of okay, even though, So I know, but that's because they've done their analysis. They know what the algorithm is. They've done their inventory, and then they've taken a risk analysis on, is it worth it to replace it given the potential threat?
Nigel, this is cryptographic inertia. I'm a physicist, right? So, but I'm going to come back to Michiel.
The cost it doesn't outweigh but
exactly.
By the benefit.
Michiel, I know you have some good ideas on this too. So, and I seem to remember from discussing with you in the past that you also brought up these points about inventory and planning. What do you think the major obstacles are? So let's say we've been through the initial inventory, etc. What kind of problems are people going to be confronted with at that stage?
Well, I think one of the first issues is that it's going to be difficult to have a complete inventory. I think the first thing to do is to understand what your core businesses are, core business cases and business, let's say, processes. That's the one I'm looking for. Because you want to, of course, first migrate the things that are most important to you as a company, your crown jewels, let's say. And usually that is also directly correlated with the data that it's handling, the most important data in your company. So if you want to migrate your business process, of course, you first need to plan around that. And I think you'll have to prioritize into phases which processes you will migrate first and which later. And then at some point you'll get to the legacy systems where you have to make a decision like, am I going to retire it completely and and
But
go
can
into
I
something
stop
else.
you? Because let me ask you something, because I liked a lot what John said as well, which I think is also a key consideration, of course, and that what Nigel said as well. You know, it's the validity period of the data, which is essential. Yeah. So again, we're not going to be bothered about data that's only worth 2 or 3 months. So to a certain extent, you might be able to migrate your crown jewels, but you may find out that you've got a bigger problem in a sort of medium risk application where the data period just happens to be one that's the most at risk. So I guess you've got to look at both dimensions, right? Do you see what I'm saying?
Sorry, could you rephrase? I didn't get that.
Yeah, I'm saying that you've sort of got your traditional risk analysis, which might tell you that application A is the most valuable application from your point of view and is perhaps the most at risk. But when you look at the data that is housing, it may be all data which is, you know, useless after a week old, in which case you're not too bothered from a PQC perspective. So presumably this analysis has got to look at certainly the kind of applications you're using. You mentioned the crown jewels, but also the length of time for which your data is valuable. I think you need to look at different aspects of the same thing. Yeah?
Absolutely. Thanks for rephrasing that. Absolutely. At TNO, we have developed what we call the quantum risk assessment methodology. And it looks at all these dimensions. So also, what kind of data is it? How long does it need to be secure for? I mean, does it need to, do you want to retain the integrity, confidentiality, both? For how long does it need to be retained? How vulnerable are the algorithms that are supposed to protect it? How much effort will it be to migrate it? Like, these are all dimensions come into play for this risk assessment. And of course, in the end, you want to know how bad is it when this is compromised, and yeah, that's what you want to get to get a priority.
But again, let me challenge all of you. So I'm going to now take the situation. You know, I've been a good company. I know I'm at risk, so I've done my analysis both of data and of applications, and I want to now get busy. Yeah, so I want to deploy some good stuff. Now, Nigel, for instance, I know that you've been quite busy in your previous life with toolkits, etc. So you have a lot of experience in this. But what is the offering like? I mean, let's say 2 scenarios. One is, in the past, when I was working in the banking sector, we did a lot of bespoke development, so that would be toolkits. But of course, a load of people just want to buy commercial off-the-shelf stuff. So how realistic is it at the moment if you want to actually implement something that you can do so pain-free, as it were?
Nothing when you implement it is pain-free.
That's true.
So there are certainly libraries out there. I mean, so all of the NIST finalists have code attached to them, so you could use those as off-the-shelf libraries if you want. There are other versions of these which are around freely available in open source, which are protected against side channels. There are hardware vendors who are currently looking at implementations of these devices, of these algorithms in different devices. So for again, protection, worrying about side channel protection, etc., etc. However, I want to come back to why agility is important on this specific point, because these new crypto algorithms are new. These are post-quantum algorithms. They're not super new. I mean, they've been around for maybe 10 years, but they're new from a cryptography point of view, and they might get broken by a normal computer before the quantum computer is ever invented. So even if you want to deploy them, you might actually have to deploy it and then 2 years later rip it out and put something else in its place, which is why you should always, again, with this migration, you should still think, oh my God, this might not be secure. And then the other thing,
the point of hybrid.
So that's the point of hybrid.
Yes.
But where you combine a one that you know works with one you know is you hope is post-quantum secure. So that's the hybrid. But there's another issue to do with the newness of these algorithms, in that when you deploy the algorithm on the side which is doing the secret stuff, like the one that's got the secret key, the signer, or the decryptor in terms of a public key operation, etc. You also have to worry about these things called side channel analysis. And whilst a lot of work has been done on side channel attacks, this is measuring your smart card and breaking your smart card because you work out what's going on inside it and extract the key out the smart card and do stuff with it, type attacks. And the protections for post-quantum algorithms are not as well developed, shall we say, as they were for the previous algorithms, ECC and RSA, which means that even if you are deployed in a hybrid setting, you might find that how you've deployed it is enabling attacks, which even though it's in a hybrid setting, still gives you attacks against your system, especially in the data encryption sense. In the authentication, a hybrid setting, you're okay-ish. But for the data encryption version, there are issues that you are exposing yourself to by moving to post-quantum that you should be aware of.
And here you open a new chapter, which again, I won't go too far into at the moment, but I'm thinking of small form factor devices, mobile devices, etc., which are particularly difficult because they're rather restricted in terms of the kind of hardware and software they can use. So that's a good point. We may return to it later, but I would like to come back to John. John, what's your take on this? I mean, again, you're someone who's using this stuff on a daily business. Do you find that your clients, first of all, do you think they're aware of this? And secondly, no, I see you shaking your head. Okay. So it's good we have this webinar, right? What do you think we need to do to sort of bring these people into the fold and get them to, the ones that need to act, to get them to act? What would you recommend there?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that first of all, the comment on are they aware? I think there's an increasing degree of I guess awareness of post quantum cryptography, quantum. People panic about hearing this, and and then all of a sudden you're building these secure systems then that potentially could be broken. So I think there's an awareness of the linkage between the topic of quantum computing and security and cryptography in its implementation. So that's it's getting better from that point of view. Most of the clients that we deal with, at least at the executive levels and so on, are not aware of these topics in this level of detail. The security people are definitely aware of it, but they're somewhat limited in what they can do because, of course, the availability of products and solutions in the market. They're not going to sit there and most of the time not roll their own crypto at the end of the day, hardware and applications and stuff like that. So I think this is also, at least in the financial sector, they're waiting for solutions to be developed, and I think that's the important part of sort of the next wave of things. And I think the crypto agility, and Nigel, you keep mentioning this, and I think I totally agree. When done right, I think will be a very important factor, because it doesn't have to be a quantum resistant cryptographic algorithm. It could be the next iteration of a more secure algorithm, right? At the end of the day.
Right.
But once you've built the mechanism, you can switch it. You can just say, I'm changing the algorithm and I'm changing the keys and I'm configuring a certain way. And now all of a sudden you're going from a potentially insecure state to something that is hopefully more secure, that could potentially even address quantum threats in the future as well. But you've implemented the methodology for addressing it, which I think is absolutely the most important thing. So these solutions need to be developed properly. I know hardware vendors that are working on things like this, of course, but I think it needs to be done more extensively throughout the industry, both in software applications and platforms and things like that as well.
Very good. So I'm going to come back to Michiel, because I'm going to take your mind back, Michiel, to when we were presenting together in Leuven, and you and I had a chat after the discussion. And it's my feeling that there's a sort of glue that's missing in this debate. I'm now looking at things from a macroscopic perspective, where I think we have very good cryptography that's available. We have organizations that are doing stuff at the moment quite efficiently. And there's this gap in the middle, I think, where this kind of knowledge and what to do about it needs to flow from the cryptographic community into the organizations that are using it. And I think this is a sort of glue that needs to come about. Do you agree, Michiel? And if so, how can we stimulate this? What should we be doing? What are your ideas on this?
I think you raise a very good point, Steve. I think the companies that are actually doing something are the ones who are already aware and already had this interest and thought it was important. And it's up to us to make sure that the huge other part of organizations get involved as well. And I get the feeling that one, either they're not aware, or two, they're just feeling in the dark. They have no clue how to get started. So, well, awareness, I think we as a community have been doing quite a lot, spreading the gospel, so to speak. And it's up to the organizations to start acting. And I think one of the main challenges is understanding what to do. And a lot of organizations can help each other in that. They can share experiences. They can, what we've done in the Netherlands at least, is start consortia where we It's not like one company does it by itself, goes through all the hoops and finds all the pitfalls by themselves. No, it's companies trying these things together, understanding how difficult it is to do vendor management, and make the vendors understand that they need to transition and the timelines become very long. And then finding out how their organizations can structure, let's say, a task force that creates policy for crypto agility and planning the migration. But also understanding that even if a vendor has something available, it doesn't mean it's going to seamlessly integrate with all your systems. There might be interoperability issues. So the only way to really figure out what the impact is going to be of post-quantum crypto on your infrastructure is to get started, try things out in, let's say, a small scale. And that's where I think a lot can be done right now for organizations, let's say in the same sector, that want to try this out, that don't want to do this alone, form consortia, try to help each other out. Or if you can't do this as just a commercial group of parties, try to involve a research organization or another neutral party with knowledge that can help you kickstart this.
Very good. In fact, one of the things people who know me know that I'm very interested and a great supporter of public-private partnerships in cybersecurity, because I think they push public goals, but you need the private sector. These are the ones who do all the work and spend all the money most of the time. So, and you also mentioned something else, which was very interesting, and I'd like to ask whether the others agree. But I like very much the idea of a sectorial approach. So bringing common actors together with common problems and trying to get them as a group to realize, what is going on, what they should do about it. But it seems to be hard to do this. So I'm going to come back to Nigel. You're in the university environment. So okay. I guess a lot of people come to you for advice, which is a nice position to be in. But how would you attack this problem? That let's say we wanted to bring a whole sector on board. Do you have any advice on what sort of mechanisms we could use?
Well, I'm not really in a university environment. I've just got a university picture behind me, and the I'm not.
You are a professor, right?
I am a professor-ish. I'm not sure. It's a very hard thing to do in terms of sectors, because often they don't want to share information for confidentiality, for not necessarily for confidentiality reasons, but for the threat of confidentiality reasons. So so the fact that it's a bit like when everyone says in cybersecurity, it would be really good if people announce when they've been attacked, because this would increase the knowledge and increase the knowledge base for everybody, and everyone will benefit. But no one wants to admit they've been attacked.
Yes.
And also, so if you have the sharing, you have to go, okay, do you really want to admit to your competitors in your sector that your posture is weak? Is that really? So I think that's a really, really hard thing to bring about, unless that's via trade organizations which are encouraging people, or regulators in areas. So almost all of the places where you have big use of cryptography is in regulated industries, whether that be banking, other areas of finance, whether you think of industrial areas where you have regulators for different things. Those regulators could say, actually, as part of our regulation, we want you all to work together to increase your security posture to do with this.
And are doing so, to be fair.
Yeah, so there's a lot of work, but I think coming from regulators is easier than it is from coming from the ground up.
This is a big debate in the UK. I mean, as many of you know, I was head of operations at TANISA for many years. And over the last 10, 15 years, there's been a continual debate on whether information sharing should be voluntary or whether it should be obligatory. Now, what we've seen in the EU, there's definitely a move towards obligatory information sharing. I'm thinking of things like NIS2 and the DORA directive. And this is not a bad thing, in my opinion, even if you can argue it the other way too, but definitely it's there. But I think one of the big challenges in information sharing is, how can I put it in a phrase? It's sharing the right information at the right time with the right person to get a job done. And I think this is where we could put a lot more effort as a community into getting these messages across. And this is why I come back to this idea of glue, whether it's PPPs or whether it's user groups or sectorial groupings, I don't know. But I really think we need this very precise and structured view of the problem in order to get people to start attacking it. So this is why it's great to have you guys on board, because you've really been very precise in your answers about what the problem is. So that would be, you know, following on from this discussion so far, what I would advise to organizations taking this up. Any other advice to organizations that are looking into this problem, or not looking into this problem for that matter?
I wanted to raise something that Michiel actually mentioned very briefly, and I think we sort of overlooked as well, perhaps in the conversation. And a lot of the, as we all know, as you implement cryptography and cryptographic systems, they have and you provide sort of a degree of encryption or signature or verification or whatever, you have a performance impact.
True.
And I think as we sort of look at alternatives, even through crypto agility or the quantum resistant cryptographic algorithms or whatever, the part of the task is, of course, will this change affect the performance of the application that is being used, right? And so many of these things could impact end users that are trying to sign on to their banking platform or whatever it is. So or even transactions failing for that matter, right? If they take too long for them to perform. So that performance topic, I think, it needs to be part of that dialogue and part of the analysis as well, because if you're just sitting there and swapping algorithms and all of a sudden, yes, it's more secure, and all of a sudden everything crashes because nothing works anymore, it's too slow or too fast or whatever, the timing is all off. It's also part of the analysis that needs to be looked at as well. So I just want to mention that, because that is also stuff that in the past, when we looked at things like this, very, very important criteria to make sure that, yes, we'll make it more secure, but we don't actually break the systems that we're actually trying to secure.
That's a great point, John. I appreciate it. You can actually play that argument backwards. Think of something like fully homomorphic encryption, where we know there are huge performance problems, but then there are applications out there that don't care anything about the performance, but have very interesting security requirements that can be solved by FHE. So it's a nice point, I think, and it definitely needs to be considered in the route down this path. Nigel, you want to make a comment?
So going on from John's point, so people shouldn't just think of performance as being, does it run faster or slower? So one of the major issues that companies will face when they switch to post quantum algorithms is the data sizes are bigger, the keys are bigger, the secret keys are bigger, the public keys are bigger, the signatures are bigger, the ciphertexts are bigger, and that, from the user perspective, might not make a big difference in terms of runtime, but from the system integrator perspective, and in terms of where do you store that data, your database table that I said earlier, had some assumption that's no longer there anymore. That can involve major re-engineering, because these things haven't been thought of. So I think that's point one. And then going on to your point, Steve, about FHE, is that actually what we do know is that a lot of these post-quantum algorithms, cryptographic algorithms, enable extra functionalities that we didn't have in the past.
Yes.
So actually what we're seeing is these new functionalities coming in, which will enable new applications of crypto. So it shouldn't be just seen as oh my God, we've got to go through this cost because someone's going to invent a quantum computer. We might also have to go through this cost because we want to enable applications that we couldn't even think about doing, 10 or 15 years ago, but which are now possible with these new forms of cryptography.
Great point. Look, two things come to mind there, and I think it's worth mentioning because we may have system integrators looking in today. I think these kind of considerations make it sometimes difficult to integrate post-quantum into protocols, for instance, where there are certain restrictions on data size, etc. And I'm also thinking of things like PKI certificates, which have a very X509 has a very limited place with signature. So these are very interesting points, and I'm really not sure how we're going to get over them in the future, but of course we will have to. And my feeling is, as you say, there will be, at some point there will be a substantial amount of re-engineering that goes on. And ironically enough, it was one of your first comments, Nigel, which I really liked, is that to some extent we are being trapped by our own hard coding of these things into our instruments. So that was a very, very interesting point to bring up. So the tool side and how we approach it is something we haven't really looked at. Perhaps end up with this vendor point of view. Do you have any advice for vendors? Because of course, at the end of the day, everyone made the point, that not many of us are going to be really using cryptographic toolkits and doing the messy stuff. We're going to be looking for applications that we can rely on. What advice, if any, would you have for vendors out there?
If I can take this one, I think there's two sides here. So vendors should be proactive in the sense that they should look forward and understand what demand might come, and already implement these kind of algorithms in their products. But on the other hand, I think it is in the end driven by demand. So the users, the organizations will also have to just ring the bell and say like, hey, what are your plans for integrating these algorithms? Because if enough organizations indicate that they want that to be done, then well, the demand is high enough that they might actually start acting faster. And if we're talking about the vendors, I would like to repeat what Nigel said many times today, and that is crypto agility. Because if in the end everyone is waiting for these vendors to update their systems, then it is so much better if they become crypto agile so that they can push new versions of their products much faster in the event of a broken implementation or a broken algorithm, or simply other security issues that might arise.
Yeah,
I want to follow up on that.
Yeah.
From a story that I was in a one country in Europe, and I was talking to some cryptographers there in industry, and they were saying that they are very negative about the prospects for post-quantum transition, because the vendors are going, well, we're not going to provide anything until we see demand from the customers.
Yeah.
And in the same room, at the same time, the customers are going, yeah, well, we're not going to actually ask for anything until we see something provided by the vendors. And then in the same room, they're all agreeing on this and just saying, yeah, but we've had a meeting and therefore we can tell our managers that we're considering the post-quantum transition, even though that we're basically, all of us have decided we ain't going to do anything.
I think this is known as a catch-22 situation, right?
Yeah.
But look, I can imagine though, as a vendor, you know, it's going to get more and more embarrassing if your clients come to you and you know, you really can't even understand, you can't explain what this is all about and give them a perspective on the way forward. So that is indeed not good news to end up on, Nigel. But I think it's a true state of the art at the moment, unfortunately. And I think we're at the end of our time. We only have 2 minutes left, so we didn't unfortunately get too many questions from the audience. So either we did a really bad job or a really good one, but I think you guys did a really good job. So I think
Steve, actually, there are 3 questions which are
unanswered. I didn't see them. Sorry.
If you look into Q&A, you'll see there are 3 questions.
I was on chat.
Nigel has already answered.
Well, let's take at least one of them. What have we got here?
How can regular citizens contribute to pushing post-quantum transition?
Yeah, let's start with that one. We won't go too far because we haven't got much time. Any thoughts on this very quickly? Role of citizens?
I can quickly chip in here. I think we've gone for a top-down approach for a while now, trying to spread the gospel and making organizations pick this up. But I think what a citizen can do is simply in their company ask, what are we doing about quantum computer and post-quantum cryptography from the bottom up, so that hopefully these 2 directions will merge and then speed this up.
Very good.
I'm going to do the last one on cryptocurrencies. So the question is, how will PQC impact cryptocurrencies? Is the answer, because essentially,
you know, John is next to you here.
I have an answer for that. I can answer that.
You're next, John. Let Nigel
finish. All the signatures will have to be replaced. So every previous transaction, or there'll have to be some sort of rollover. But currently, they're kind of bearing a lot. And also, it's not just the crypto layer 1, the layer 2 levels are all using these zero knowledge provers, and almost all those zero knowledge provers are not post-quantum secure. So in some sense, it's not just the basic level, but the higher level stuff, it looks very hard to actually transition to post-quantum.
So John, you're ready.
Yeah. So in the past, I mean, there have been sort of incidents with regards to, you know, certain cryptocurrencies where a hard fork has resulted. I mean, I think here is detect, you know, before it happens or as it's happening, and then sort of hard fork sort of the cryptocurrency into a new sort of quantum resistant algorithm. Again, it's all about sort of the managing the transition. So the same rules apply to this community as everybody else. I think at the end of the day, you need to know
the level 2 roll-ups won't.
Yes, that's
Okay, I'm going to go to the last one because it's a very practical question. I like it a lot. can you recommend publicly available either inventory or agility tools one could use in a real environment?
I think it's hard to say. I don't think a lot of organizations have experience with the tools that are available. The few commercial ones, I think, have like an agent approach where they scan the network to see what kind of data is going on to get an indication of the assets being used. But I personally don't have first-hand experience, so I think it would be good for organizations who want to take the step to just query these crypto asset discovery tool organizations to get a preview or get a tryout for this.
Yeah.
One thing I know that one software company did, which was a vendor thing, is that it would monitor all of the implementers, and if they typed in certain keywords into their C programs, their Java programs, or their Rust programs, AES, it sent a signal to the central crypto division going, this person started to use cryptography, go and advise him to make sure he doesn't screw it up.
Wow.
And so that was actually at the source code level to stop developers just taking some code and using it without actually talking back to the central crypto experts.
It sounds powerful. Also sounds a bit scary.
I would have some privacy concerns there.
Just perhaps a last word from my part on this. Tools are good. I very much appreciate use of them, but I always say keep things simple and don't let tools rule the day. So even if it's a very simple thing like an Excel spreadsheet, it still does the job. So the important thing is to make the effort to go out there and find out what's out there and to put it down in inventory. I wouldn't worry too much about the tooling, but we've had some good ideas here. I've really got to wrap it up there, guys. Sorry, because we're up time. But it was a great discussion. So I would like to thank you all very much. I certainly very much enjoyed it. I hope you did too. And I very much hope that the people watching the webinar enjoyed it. Back to you, David.
All right, thank you very much, Stephen. I'd like to thank John, Michiel, Nigel, and Steve for a great, lively discussion. Just to prove that not everybody agrees with everybody, which is excellent because that makes things really boring. This panel, this session has certainly been anything but boring. Very lively. It has been recorded, so it will be available on the TDL.